London, 1835. Rain falls over Mayfair like a verdict whispered in a courtroom. Penelope feels its weight as she watches through the carriage window, not the water darkening the cobblestones, but the kind that slides inward, cold and patient. Across from her rests the only trunk they allowed her to keep, too small to hold an entire life, perfectly adequate, however, for someone dismissed with unseemly haste. There were no farewells. Not even a sympathetic glance from the servants, who avoided her eyes as if shame were contagious. Only the muffled rumble of wheels on wet stone and her own uneven breath trying to steady itself, and failing. She doesn't cry. She would if there were room for it. But what she feels is narrow, tight, hard as a knot pulled by hands that never intended to loosen it. 1 week ago, she spun beneath golden chandeliers at the Ellingtons' ballroom, laughing, unaware that while she danced, a lie was already slithering from ear to ear. 1 week ago, her name was still clean. Today, it feels like a memory belonging to someone else. The carriage stops. The driver climbs down quickly, careful not to meet her gaze, not out of disrespect, but from the discomfort of a man carrying out orders he wishes he didn't understand. He opens the door with a small nod, and Penelope lifts her chin before stepping into the rain-soaked street. The cold drops strike her face like a farewell kiss, frigid, bruising. She walks toward the docks, where a massive ship rocks against its moorings. Boston. The word tastes foreign, distant, almost unreal. But it is where she has been sent, not by choice, but because Joshua, Duke of Whitcomb, pressed by stern advisers and his unyielding mother, believed it was for the best. He did not listen to her. He did not defend her. And in the end, he did not hesitate nearly enough. Penelope climbs the gangplank without allowing herself a backward glance, but before she reaches the deck, her fingers brush her lower belly, a gesture so quick it could have been imagined. A secret, delicate, newly formed thing, and yet the only fragment of hope she has left. As the ship groans beneath her feet and London vanishes into the fog, Penelope understands something with the cruel clarity of lightning. If they expect the ocean to return her obedient, silenced, stripped of her resolve, they are gravely mistaken. She turns her back on England, and with it, on the man who judged her without ever trying to know her. If this story touched you in any way, feel free to like the video and subscribe. It helps our little corner of historical romance grow. And tell me in the comments, from which city and country are you watching? I love discovering how far our stories can travel. Chapter 1. The Silent Departure. The crossing had lasted 42 days. Penelope counted each one as if they were pages from a book she had never chosen to read. The sea was merciless, the food tasteless, the silence deafening. She shared her cramped cabin with 3 other women, a widow traveling to meet her son, a governess hired by a merchant family, and a young girl who never gave her name. None of them asked questions. Penelope was grateful for that. She had no answers she could offer. In the first weeks of the voyage, the nausea of betrayal tangled with the heaving of the waves. She vomited in the mornings, and sometimes in the afternoons, always hidden in a corner of the deck, her shawl pulled over her face. She knew her discomfort came from more than the rocking of the ship. In London, only days before departure, she had noticed her courses were 2 months late, the first warning. The stubborn queasiness that refused to fade with distance from the shore became the second. Now there was no doubt left. She carried something no one knew about, something she had not dared to confess even to her own family. She hadn't told her mother, who had wept silently as she folded Penelope's dresses into the small trunk they allowed her, nor her younger sister, who waved from the window with red-rimmed eyes and lips pressed tight so she wouldn't call out her name. And she certainly hadn't told Joshua. He had no right to know about the child he had cast aside before it even existed. Yet, no matter how fiercely she tried to cling to anger, certain memories kept forcing their way back. Like the afternoon in the park, when Joshua noticed the wind had carried off her shawl and quietly draped it over her shoulders. Quick, discreet, almost shy. Or the moment in Whitcomb's library, when she found him reading French poetry, a contrast so startling to his usual rigidity that Penelope almost doubted her senses. He had lifted his head, startled, and for an instant, so brief it could have been imagination, he stopped being the impeccable duke and became merely a man who touched her gently, a man who murmured her name as if he were discovering a secret. And there had been that night. The night when, between kisses and whispered breaths, Penelope gave herself to the man who was meant to become her husband in 3 weeks, not out of duty, but because for one almost cruel moment she believed he loved her. 2 weeks later came the Ellingtons' ball, and everything collapsed. The memory returns without warning, vivid enough to hurt. A week remained until the wedding when the scandal erupted, and a week after the ball, Penelope was already at the port, boarding a ship for the far side of the world. Now, standing on the deck with the sun burning itself into an endless horizon, she tries to understand why any of it still matters, why at some point she had wanted him to truly see her. Perhaps because over the months, beneath guarded gestures and measured words, she sensed in him something he would never admit aloud, a loneliness that mirrored her own. One afternoon, the sea lay too still, and the calm unsettled her. To keep from unraveling, she reached for ink and paper. She wrote what she would never say. "Joshua, you believed the words of someone who never wished me well. I will not defend my name. It has already been judged. But I will not return asking forgiveness for something I did not do. If one day you learn the truth, I hope it weighs on you as heavily as your sentence weighed on me." She folded the letter and hid it at the bottom of her trunk, between the dresses her mother had packed in haste. Then she climbed back to the deck, letting the wind tug at her red hair as she closed her eyes. For the first time since boarding, she felt no anger, only the emptiness that follows it. And something else, faint and aching, like the shadow of a future that could have been but never would be. She remembered the morning of her departure. Joshua had stood at the entrance of Whitcomb Manor, his back to the carriage, hands clasped behind him, posture flawless, face turned away. He had not looked at her. He had not waved. He had not offered a single farewell. And Penelope, wounded and furious as she was, felt a strange tightening in her chest. Because he seemed carved from stone, as if sending her away cost him nothing. But it cost him. She knew it. She had seen once the way he pressed his fingers together when he was nervous. And that morning, even from a distance, she noticed his hands trembling. When the ship finally docked in Boston at the end of June, Penelope descended the gangplank with her trunk in one hand and her heart in the other, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and something like relief. The city was loud, hurried, full of voices that spoke too quickly. It smelled of fish, fresh timber, and something she couldn't quite name, perhaps freedom, perhaps desperation. She walked along the uneven stone streets until she reached the boarding house recommended by the Dowager Duchess herself for her recovery far from indiscreet eyes. The place was simple, almost poor, but it was hers. No one here knew her surname. No one knew she had once been betrothed to a duke. Perhaps they wondered why an English lady arrived alone. But unlike London, no one seemed eager to demand explanations. Penelope climbed the narrow stairs to the room that would be her home for the coming months. The iron bed creaked. The small table tilted to one side. The window overlooked a grimy alley. Nothing in the room held beauty, and yet something inside her expanded. She sat, placed a hand lightly over her still flat, still silent belly, and for the first time since the night everything shattered, she felt a spark of something real. Hope. Perhaps this wasn't the end. Perhaps it was the beginning of something she didn't yet know how to name. Perhaps far from Joshua and far from England, she could finally become who she had always wanted to be, without asking permission, without fearing judgment. And perhaps, someday, he would learn what he had lost. And perhaps by then, it would already be too late. Penelope removed the shawl from her shoulders and hung it over the chair. Then she opened the window, letting Boston's warm air fill the room. Street voices rose in waves, carried by the scent of fresh bread from some distant bakery. And then, almost without realizing it, she smiled. Small, fragile, but real. Chapter 2. The weight of her absence. Joshua had always believed that doing what was right would be enough. That obeying duty, honoring the family name and keeping the Whitcomb reputation intact, would be sufficient to shape a respectable life. But now, seated in the silent library of Whitcomb Manor, the captain's letter open on the desk before him, he begins to understand how deeply he had confused duty with fear. The letter is brief, far too professional, far too cold for what it conveys. Your Grace, as requested, I inform you that Miss Penelope arrived safely in Boston on June 28th. She boarded without incident and disembarked without accompaniment as instructed. Joshua reads it again, and again. Safely, without accompaniment. As if sending a woman across an ocean alone were merely a formality. One more task crossed off a list he never should have written. He closes his eyes and pinches the bridge of his nose. The headache that has haunted him for weeks returns with ritual precision. It is not physical. It is the kind of weight that forms only when conscience finally gathers the courage to speak louder than obedience. The weeks since the Ellingtons' ball already feel like a lifetime. Nearly 2 months since Lady Caroline Merrick, the young woman his mother praised endlessly as appropriate, had whispered with urgent righteousness that Penelope had been seen in a shadowed corner of the garden with a man no one recognized. Joshua asked nothing more, did not question who the man was, did not wonder why Caroline, ever so diligent, had seemed almost eager to deliver such news. He simply believed her, because believing was easier than facing the possibility that his mother might be wrong, or, worse still, that Penelope might never fit into the rigid life he had built for himself. She had always been called difficult, opinionated, bold, incapable of bowing to the expectations he had accepted without resistance. He had heard so many murmured judgments about her that, without realizing it, he began accepting them as truth. Now, revisiting every detail, every scene, every word, he begins to wonder whether those judgments had ever been anything more than fear. His fear, not hers. Joshua rises and walks to the window. The garden is immaculate, pruned with the precision his mother demanded. The rose bushes freshly trimmed, the stone paths perfectly aligned, every leaf in its place. A life perfectly ordered, perfectly suffocating. And he remembers Penelope there. Weeks before the scandal, she had knelt in the soil, her dress smudged, fiery hair escaping its braid, holding a wilted flower between her fingers. She had smiled at it, as if sharing a secret, a soft, private, utterly alive smile. Joshua had stood on the terrace watching her for far too long. She hadn't noticed at first. When she finally lifted her gaze and met his, the smile vanished, as if his presence extinguished any flicker of joy. And yet, on that night, the same night he thought he understood the source of that smile, she had turned to him. He cannot push the memory away. The warmth of her hands sliding up the back of his neck, the restrained tremor in their first kiss, the way she seemed to offer not just her body, but her trust, something he had never deserved. It was the only time she had looked at him without fear, without caution, without the weight of his title between them, and he ruined it. Not out of cruelty, but out of cowardice, because at dawn he had pretended nothing had happened, pretended she hadn't touched him with reverence and desire, pretended he hadn't wanted her with equal intensity, and that the wanting hadn't terrified him more than any battlefield. He hated it, hated being the man who made the light disappear from her eyes. But he had not known how to change, because men like him do not kneel in the dirt, do not speak to flowers, do not smile without reason, and above all, men like him do not know what to do when love is offered to them. Now, staring at the perfect garden, he feels only emptiness, and a regret that begins to hollow him from the inside out. The door opens without warning. The Dowager Duchess steps inside, her posture turning any room into a battlefield, chin lifted, purple silk immaculate, eyes cold and calculating. Still thinking about her, she asks bluntly. It is not concern, it is command. I received word she arrived in Boston, Joshua replies, not turning from the window, as if the manicured green could offer answers he desperately lacks. Good, the Duchess says, smoothing her glove. Then the matter is settled. Joshua grips the windowsill. Mother, what if we were wrong? The silence that follows is thick as lead. When she speaks, her voice is a blade. We were not. Lady Caroline is of flawless reputation. She would have no reason to lie. And Penelope would have no reason to do what they claimed. He turns then, facing his mother for the first time in weeks. Stubborn, yes, but never dishonest. The Duchess lifts her chin higher, like a queen on the verge of issuing a decree. You have known her less than a year, Joshua. I have known the world far longer, and I know a woman who is unfit to be a duchess when I see one. He feels anger rise, warm, heavy, but forces it down, as he has done since boyhood. Men like him do not shout, do not lose control, do not admit they may have made the worst mistake of their lives. She was my fiancée, he says quietly, voice roughened by a truth realized too late. I should have listened to her. You did what was necessary. She turns to leave, but pauses at the door. If you insist on tormenting yourself, remember this. She is the one who stained this family's name, not you. The door closes with a sharp snap. Joshua is alone again. He returns to the desk, folds the captain's letter with too much care, as if the paper might tear under the weight of his guilt, and places it in the drawer where he keeps all correspondence about her voyage. No letter to Penelope, none from her. But there is another inside. One he began writing the night before she left. Penelope, The ink stops there, 2 words, nothing more. He hadn't been able to continue, not that night, not after, because everything inside him had been confusion, fear, doubt, and that quiet, dangerous emotion he had never dared to name. Joshua closes the drawer slowly, but his fingers tremble, the same fingers Penelope had observed without his knowing on the morning he lacked the courage to say goodbye. He inhales as if rising from deep water, and finally allows the doubt to cut straight through him. No defenses, no excuses. And for the first time since sending her away, Joshua Whitcomb admits to himself that he may have destroyed the only person who could have made him better, and that when he realizes the full extent of it, it may already be far too late. Chapter 3. Roots in a Foreign Land. Penelope wakes to the sound of voices drifting through the thin window. A man shouts fresh fish in a dragging accent, and another voice, a woman's, calls out that she has warm bread just out of the oven. She opens her eyes slowly. The cracked ceiling, the stained walls, the smell of aged wood mixed with the damp odor that lingers after the night's rain. Boston, not London, not anymore. She sits at the edge of the bed and lets her feet touch the cold floor. Waits. The nausea always comes the same way, silent, patient, announcing itself before it strikes. Today it arrives a few seconds late, but it comes. She closes her eyes, braces her palms on her knees, and breathes until the wave subsides. Then she counts to 10 as if each number were a step leading her farther from the past. She needed to work. She needed to live without depending on the small sum Joshua had sent, cold money delivered by his secretary, without a single word written by the Duke's own hand. Anyone looking at it would think it nothing more than the settling of a debt. Perhaps that was exactly what it was. Penelope dresses in the plainest gown she brought, brown cotton, no lace, no shine. She pins her hair into a firm knot, gathers her bag, and descends the narrow stairs of the boarding house. She finds Mrs. Dawes, the owner, kneeling in the hallway, scrubbing the floor with a worn cloth. "Out so early, dear?" the woman asks without lifting her head. "I'm going to look for work." Penelope hesitates. "Do you know anyone who might need help? I can read, write, keep accounts when I've taught before." Mrs. Dawes studies her for several long seconds, not the posture, but the soul. Miss Lowell, down near the harbour, is always complaining she's alone with 20 children. She might be willing to hire someone. Her voice softens just a little, but mind you, she pays little and demands much. "I don't need much, only a chance." Mrs. Dawes mutters something in Irish, blessing or warning, Penelope cannot tell, and returns to her work. Penelope steps into the street. Morning air carries the scent of burned coal, salt, and fresh bread. People walk briskly, speak loudly, gesture with their hands, bump shoulders without apology. Boston is not elegant, but it is alive. She follows the directions until she finds a small white wooden house with large windows and peeling paint. A crooked nail holds a sign that reads, "Miss Lowell's School for Children." The name comforts her, simple, direct, unpretentious. Penelope takes a deep breath and pushes the door open. The floor creaks. A thin woman with round spectacles and a fatigued expression lifts her eyes from a pile of notebooks. "Yes?" she asks, already impatient. "My name is Penelope. Mrs. Dawes said you might be in need of help. Miss Lowell tilts her head, assessing her carefully. "You're English." "I am." "And you came to teach here?" The woman gestures around the humble building. "Why?" Penelope feels her pulse quicken. The truth is impossible. A lie, dangerous. She chooses the narrow path between the two. "Because I need to redirect my life, and teaching is what I do best." Miss Lowell adjusts her spectacles, observes her again, for longer than is comfortable. "I can take you on only on a trial basis," she says, closing a book. $3 a week. You begin tomorrow at 7. If you miss a day without notice, or if you can't handle the rowdiness of the harbour boys, I won't have you back." Penelope nods, her voice caught in her throat. "I won't miss a day." The woman returns to her papers, but calls out without looking up. "And, Penelope, it doesn't matter where you came from. It matters whether you work well. That's what the children need." "And that is what I expect." Penelope thanks her with a small bow and leaves the school. Outside, the sun is breaking through the clouds, lighting the wooden facades and the rattling carts that pass along the street. She walks without hurry, stepping around puddles, taking in every detail of the city. The small shops, the strong smell of fish near the barrels, the women carrying baskets on their hips. It is all so different from London that for a fleeting moment she feels relieved not to be recognized by anyone. At a corner stall, a man sells flowers. Red roses, white daisies, yellow lilies heaped in a basket. Penelope stops. Her heart gives a small leap, unexpected, involuntary. The roses remind her of the Whitcomb garden, the scent of early mornings, the quiet that wrapped the estate, the damp earth beneath her knees as she held a wilted bloom between her fingers. And she remembers him, the weight of his silent gaze on her, the fleeting, almost impossible feeling that, for one moment, Joshua had truly seen her. Penelope closes her eyes for a single second, then opens them again and turns away from the flowers. She cannot afford nostalgia, not when she needs to find strength in places she has not yet discovered. But before turning the corner, she glances back. The flower basket sways in the wind. And she feels a small aching tug, not longing for London, not longing for Whitcomb, but longing for that brief moment when she believed she mattered, when she believed she was seen. She inhales deeply, squares her shoulders, and continues forward, because that moment is over, because she is building a life that no longer depends on any man's gaze, not even his. And because if Joshua ever learns the truth, if the day comes when he regrets everything, Penelope is no longer certain there will be a door left open for him to walk through. Some doors require strength to close, others require even greater strength to keep closed. Penelope keeps walking, one step at a time, in a foreign land, but for the first time on a path that belongs entirely to her. Chapter 4. The Truth That Burns. On a heavy August morning, the butler enters the library with a pace far quicker than usual. "Your Grace, Lady Helen Bromley requests an audience. She says it is urgent." Joshua lifts his eyes from the documents. Lady Helen rarely visits, and never without notice. "Show her in." Moments later, the door opens. Lady Helen stands pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She offers a brief curtsy, but wastes no time with pleasantries. "Your Grace, I have come because my silence no longer finds rest in my conscience." Joshua slowly sets aside the papers. Something in her tone forces him to sit straighter. "On the night of the Ellington ball," Lady Helen continues, voice trembling yet steady, "Miss Penelope was not in the garden with any gentleman. She was with me in the library, helping me search for a misplaced volume. Lady Caroline Merrick saw her leave the room alone and, for reasons I do not understand, chose to twist the scene into a lie." Joshua goes absolutely still. Each word drops like stone. "I feared becoming involved," Lady Helen admits, lowering her gaze, "and afraid of the social consequences, I remained silent. Now, however, I understand that my silence has turned into injustice." The air feels thin. Joshua inhales once, then again. The words do not change. The truth does not shift. Penelope was innocent. She had always been innocent. The first emotion is not anger, nor sorrow. It is a strike of pure shame, brutal, undeniable, cutting through him like a blade. He rises so abruptly, the chair tips backward and crashes to the floor. He stares at it with an expression he barely recognizes, shock, and something dangerously close to desperation. He is not a man who loses control, but today the ground seems to have given way beneath him. "I thank you for your courage, Lady Helen," he says, his voice raw, "and I must beg your pardon, but I need to address this at once." She dips her head, eyes shining. "I hope there is still time, Your Grace." Joshua throws open the door with a violence that startles the butler waiting outside. "Have the carriage brought at once," he orders, his voice deep and unyielding, "and send an urgent message to my solicitor. I need him here before nightfall." The butler swallows hard. He has never seen the Duke like this. "Yes, Your Grace." Joshua does not wait. The moment the horses are ready, he climbs into the carriage without allowing the coachman to open the door for him. "To the Merrick residence," he says simply. The carriage races through Mayfair. Joshua sees none of it, not the houses, not the trees, not the sky reflected in the glass. All that exists is Lady Helen's sentence burning like heated iron. "Through my silence injustice was born." At the Merrick mansion, Joshua steps out before the coachman can react. The footman who opens the door looks terrified. "Your Grace, shall I announce?" "No." The word is sharp as steel. He enters, crosses the hall like a man immune to consequences. Servants try to stop him, murmuring protests, but no one dares lay a hand on him. Lady Caroline and her mother sit in the front drawing room, embroidering near the window. Both rise when they see him. "Duke of Whitcomb," Mrs. Merrick exclaims, forcing a smile that wavers. "What an unexpected—" Joshua ignores her completely. His gaze is fixed on Caroline. "You lied." The embroidery falls from her lap. The silence that follows is suffocating. Caroline turns white as linen. Her lips tremble. She cannot form a single word. Joshua steps closer, his voice low, but so controlled the entire room seems to shrink. "On the night of the Ellington ball, you told my mother that Penelope was with a gentleman. The truth is different. Lady Helen Bromley was with her in the library, and she saw everything. She told me the truth. Are you going to deny it?" Caroline opens and closes her mouth without sound. 2 tears slip down her cheeks, not of remorse, but of terror. I thought," she whispers, barely audible. Joshua tilts his head as if listening to an insect. "Why did you do it?" Her mother tries to intervene, her voice trembling. "Your Grace, surely there has been some misunderstanding. Caroline would never—" Joshua looks at her, and whatever she sees in his eyes is enough to silence her instantly. "If either of you attempts to conceal the truth," he says with aristocratic coldness, "London will know what happened. And there will be no invitations, no allies, no shred of respect left to sustain the Merrick name, I will ensure it." Mrs. Merrick turns ghost pale. Caroline covers her face, choking on sobs. But she does not confess. She does not apologize. She does not attempt to repair anything. She simply cries, and that is all the confirmation Joshua needs. He turns and leaves without offering farewell. She is not worth another word. When Joshua returns to Whitcomb Manor, the solicitor is already waiting in the library, hat in hand, expression tense. Joshua enters, shuts the door, and hands him the letter. "I need you to investigate every detail from the night of the ball," he says firmly. "Identify witnesses, gather statements, and restore Miss Penelope's name among the families who matter, discreetly but unmistakably." The solicitor reads. His eyes narrow. "And what of Miss Merrick, Your Grace?" Joshua breathes deeply. The wounded part of him wants destruction, wants humiliation, wants justice carved into stone. But another part, the part Penelope may have glimpsed in him that afternoon in the garden, knows savagery will not bring anything back. "Nothing," he decides at last. "Let her live with her silence. It will be punishment enough." The solicitor nods and leaves. Joshua approaches the window. The garden is in full bloom. The same flowers Penelope once kneeled beside. The same flowers she held softly with her fingertips, smiling at something simple and alive he never understood. Now everything looks different. He rests his forehead against the cold glass. Penelope is on the other side of the ocean. She suffered because of him. She was torn from his life because he chose to believe the lie that protected him the most. And as the house remains painfully still, Joshua allows the truth, the real truth, sharp and inescapable, to pour through him for the first time. He lost something he never understood while it was his, and now he fears that when he finally knows what to do, it may already be far too late. Chapter 5. The weight of the secret teaching children proves far more difficult than Penelope imagined. Not because of the lessons, she knows reading, writing, and arithmetic well, but because of the nature of Boston's children. They are blunt, restless, and loud. They know nothing of decorum and make no attempt to appear agreeable. During her second week, as she writes a word on the slate board, a 7-year-old boy raises his hand, not for permission, but to point at her with the effortless insolence of someone raised by the docks. "Why do you talk so funny?" he asks, his face streaked with dirt and pride. Penelope breathes in, reminding herself she is not in a polished London schoolroom. "Because I come from England." "And why'd you come here?" he presses. The question drops like a stone into still water. Across the room, Miss Lowell looks up. Penelope feels the weight of the answer, and the familiar wave of nausea climbing her throat, the same that greets her every morning, reminding her that everything in her life has changed. "Because I needed to start over," she replies at last, choosing the truest answer she can offer. The boy squints, unconvinced, but asks no more. Penelope is grateful for that. The weeks crawl by, shaped by routines she forces upon herself so she will not collapse. She teaches in the morning, walks back to the boarding house in the afternoon, and at night she thinks, or writes, letters she never sends, some for her mother, some for her sister, but most for Joshua, letters that begin in bitterness and end in something she refuses to name, something that aches, a forbidden kind of longing. "Joshua, you believed the word of someone who barely knew me and silenced mine. You gave me no time, no questions, no chance to show you who I was. Perhaps we were two strangers trying to fulfill an arrangement. Perhaps the mistake began long before we were introduced. Or perhaps—" She never finishes that one, always folds the page before writing what would come next. One night, after tucking away the unfinished letter, Penelope rests a hand on her stomach. It has begun to round, discreet but undeniable. Anyone looking closely would notice. And then, in a month, perhaps 2, there will be no hiding it. Boston may be a land of opportunity, but its tongues are sharp. Unmarried pregnant women draw looks, whispers, judgments. A tremor of fear moves through her, small but honest. That is when someone knocks. Mrs. Dawes stands in the doorway holding an envelope. "A letter for you, dear." Her tone is gentle, her eyes observant. "From London." Penelope freezes. London. She takes the letter. The seal of Whitcomb Manor glints under the dim lamp, but the handwriting is not Joshua's. It is his secretary's. Her heart tightens, not with hope, but with warning. Penelope waits for Mrs. Dawes to close the door before opening the envelope. "Miss Penelope, by instruction of His Grace, I inform you that your reputation has been restored among the appropriate families." Penelope stops breathing. "The truth regarding the night of the Ellington ball has been revealed. Lady Helen Bromley confirmed you were with her. Lady Caroline Merrick has been deemed responsible for the falsehood." She closes her eyes. The truth has come. Late. But it has come. She continues reading. "His Grace requests that you return to England at your earliest convenience. Passage will be arranged upon receipt of your preferred date. Signed, Mr. Edmund Clark, Secretary to His Grace the Duke of Whitcomb." Penelope rereads it. The words blur, reads again. They remain cold. Correct. Hollow. He did not write, did not apologize, did not explain, did not say a single word. It is merely a notice, an elegant command. Return, as if she were part of the estate inventory. Anger arrives first, hot, unexpected. Then comes something deeper, a pain she refuses to claim, because for one foolish, fleeting moment she imagined that when the truth came, it might come in his handwriting. But it did not. She walks to the window. Boston wakes outside, carts rattling, vendors shouting, children darting through narrow streets. It is chaotic, imperfect, loud, but it is real. Here, no one calls her lady. Here, she is not the exiled fiancée of a duke. Here, she is simply Penelope, the pregnant woman whose husband travels for work, who teaches children, who pays her rent with her own hands. And suddenly, that seems more valuable than any London ballroom. Back at the table, she takes a clean sheet of paper. Her stomach tightens, not with nausea, but with resolve. She writes slowly, weighing every word. Mr. Clark, thank you for the information provided. However, I must inform you that I will not be returning to England. I have established myself in Boston and intend to remain here. Please do not arrange passage. Kindly convey my regards to His Grace. Miss Penelope Belmont. When she finishes, she closes her eyes. It is simple. It is final. But her hand trembles as she folds the paper. If she returned, she would be forced to reveal the child, and Joshua would do what duty demands: marriage, inheritance, the appearance of honor. None of it would be choice, none of it freedom. If she stays, life will be hard. She may be judged, she may be rejected, but she will belong to herself. Penelope leaves the boarding house before her courage cools. She posts the letter with a breath that stumbles from her chest, like a plunge into icy water. The mailbox shuts with a sharp click. There is no going back. She closes her eyes, feels something inside her, not pain, not fear, but release. Returning home, Mrs. Dawes asks, "Everything all right, dear?" Penelope smiles, small, real, but aching. It is, the best it can be. That night, lying on the narrow bed, she rests her hand again on the slowly growing swell of her belly. Something grows there, something that does not depend on Joshua or London or any title, something that belongs only to her. "You and I," she whispers in the dark. "We'll be all right. I promise." And for the first time since she learned she was with child, she believes her own words. She falls asleep without dreaming of silks or silent gardens, or a man who never learned how to speak his heart. She sleeps only with herself, and with the small future she carries beneath her ribs. Chapter 6. The decision that changes everything. Penelope's letter arrives on a heavy September afternoon, the kind where the sky threatens to break open, but never does. Joshua is in the library, where he has spent the last week surrounded by papers that mean very little, when his secretary enters with the envelope. "A letter from Boston, Your Grace." Joshua feels his heart falter. It shouldn't, but it does. He nods a restrained thank you and waits for the man to leave before breaking the seal. Her handwriting. It takes only a single line for the world he has tried so hard to keep intact to split with surgical precision. "I have decided to remain in Boston. I do not wish to return to England." The words weigh more than the paper that carries them. Joshua closes his eyes, opens them again, reads the sentence once more, and again, as if the meaning might change if he stares hard enough. It doesn't. The letter slips from his hand and settles on the desk. He stands motionless for a long time, gaze fixed on the words that reject him. She does not wish to return. At first, what flickers inside him is wounded pride, hot, brief, almost childish. How can she refuse? He restored her reputation. He did what was necessary. He repaired what others shattered. But the thought collapses almost as quickly as it forms. Because Joshua knows, deep down knows, that he did not do everything right. He did the minimum, and he did it too late. He restored her name as one settles a debt. And he did not write a single line that was truly his. No apology. No explanation. No word that might reveal that ever since she left, nothing in Whitcomb Manor has been in its rightful place, that the memory of her hangs in the air like a ghost, haunting him every day, in every thought he tries and fails to silence. Joshua walks to the window. He places a hand on the cold glass. His breath comes heavy. Effortlessly, he sees what might have been, a life that never existed, but now threads itself through every shadow of this house. If only he had asked her that night, if he had believed her, if he had faced his mother, if he had allowed himself to feel what had been burning beneath the surface since the beginning, what he tried so desperately to smother. If he had not spent months trying to forget that night, the only night he lowered his mask, let her glimpse the man beneath, and for a fleeting moment wanted her to see him truly. Perhaps Penelope would still be here. Perhaps there would be laughter in the halls. Perhaps his garden would have bloomed again, touched by hands far gentler than his own. But he did none of that, and now he is alone with the cost of his own cowardice. The door opens without warning. The Dowager Duchess enters, her posture as rigid as ever. News from her? Her eyes flick to the open letter on the desk. Judging by your face, she declined your request to return, she says, with a calmness that drips like poison. Joshua does not turn. Yes. The faint spark of satisfaction in her eyes is enough to make him finally face her, not as the obedient son she molded, but as the man loss has forced him to become. I always knew she was unsuitable, the Duchess adds, adjusting her glove as though preparing for a ball. She was more than suitable, Joshua replies, voice low, steady. She was honest, and I treated her as if she were disposable. The Duchess pales by a shade. Joshua, do not speak that way. I spent my entire life listening to your voice above my own, he continues, not raising his tone. He doesn't need to. I did everything you wanted. I was the impeccable duke you demanded. And what did I receive in return? An empty home and the certainty that I drove away the only person who could have taught me what it means to truly live. The Duchess takes a step forward, a rare gesture for her. Happiness is not the purpose of a ducal marriage, she says, but now her voice trembles. Joshua lets out a short, bitter laugh. Then what is? Appearance? Lineage? Control? He shakes his head. If that is all a duke must have, then I already possess it. And it means absolutely nothing. He picks up Penelope's letter from the table and slips it into his coat. He straightens. I'm going to Boston. His mother's eyes widen. Joshua, you cannot simply cross the ocean for a girl. I can, he interrupts, and I will. And if she does not wish to see you, she insists, no longer cold but frightened. He breathes deeply, and this time he does not run from the truth. Perhaps she won't. And she has every reason for that. Joshua turns toward the door. But I will not remain here while there is even the smallest chance of repairing what I destroyed. He leaves before she can speak again. In the corridor, he calls to his secretary. Arrange passage on the next ship to America. Send letters to the steward and land agent as well. They will oversee everything in my absence. The secretary hesitates, visibly alarmed. Your Grace, for how long do you intend to stay abroad? Joshua looks past him, beyond the house, beyond England, beyond the ocean. As long as it takes. In his room, he begins packing. Not much, only what is necessary to cross a continent and an ocean. When he opens the drawer of his writing desk, he finds the unfinished letter he wrote the night before Penelope's departure. Penelope, Nothing follows. Now he knows exactly what comes next. Joshua sits, takes a fresh sheet of paper, and writes, without dictation, without a mask, without a title. Penelope, I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I ask that you read these lines knowing they are true. I sent you away not only because I doubted you, but because I feared myself. I feared that what I felt beside you would force me to question the life I was raised to uphold. There is strength in you, Penelope, strength I always admired and never knew how to match. I failed out of fear, out of pride, and out of not understanding that your honesty was the only thing that could have saved me from myself. Perhaps it is too late. Perhaps you have found peace far from here. If so, I will accept it, but I must look into your eyes and say this in person. I am sorry, deeply sorry, and if you permit it, I will do all I can to mend what I broke. Joshua. He folds the letter with the care he never had when he still had the chance. He places it beside her reply, the words that wounded him and paradoxically set him free. Joshua closes his trunk, breathes deeply, and looks out the window. The gardens of Whitcomb are immaculate, as always. But what he wants, what matters, is not here. It is an ocean away. And this time, he will not stand still and wait for fate to decide. This time, he is going. Not as the flawless Duke London expects, but as Joshua, the man he should have been from the beginning. The man who finally chooses. Chapter 7. The Inevitable Encounter. On that clear October morning, Penelope's belly can no longer be hidden beneath any shawl. At the harbour market, while choosing apples, she feels another kick, firm, insistent, as if the small life inside her insists on reminding her that it exists. She pauses, basket in hand, and presses her free palm to the rounded swell, breathing deeply at the simplicity and impossibility of the moment. A smile slips out before she can stop it. For the first time, the child is no longer fear, nausea, or uncertainty. It is life, small but certain, and hers. "Are you all right, miss?" an elderly vendor asks gently, cautious not to pry. Penelope wipes her eyes discreetly. "Yes, very." She buys bread, cheese, 2 apples, and walks back to the boarding house. The weight of her 7-month belly already draws curious glances, and Mrs. Dawes, with her sharp Irish eyes, had asked questions. Penelope chose the half-truth. "The father is in England. There is no marriage." Nothing more. The woman didn't judge. She only sighed, pressed her lips together, and said, "A young woman alone rarely has an easy path. As long as you pay the rent, you can stay." Penelope had been grateful. Compassion is a rare currency for someone in her condition. One afternoon, when she climbs the stairs and opens the door to her room, she finds Mrs. Dawes by the window, holding an envelope. "This arrived a short while ago," she says gently, "from London." Penelope's heart tightens sharply. The seal is Whitcomb Manor, but the handwriting is not the secretary's, it is Joshua's. Mrs. Dawes steps back and closes the door. Penelope stands frozen before the envelope, as if it might explode at the slightest touch. Part of her wants to hide it forever, intact and silent. Another part wants to tear it apart. But the part that always wins, the one that seeks truth even when it hurts, slides a finger beneath the seal. She reads, slowly, breathing between each line, because she feels that if she rushes, something in her might break. When she finishes, she must sit on the edge of the bed to keep her legs from giving way. "There was a strength in you that disarmed me, and I was a coward for fearing it. I wish for another chance, if you judge that I might deserve one. I am on my way." Penelope closes her eyes. The world shifts strangely, slow, as if for a moment she forgot how to breathe. He is coming. Joshua is crossing the ocean for her. "Oh God," she whispers, hand pressing her belly. The baby moves, as if answering her. "And now," she murmurs, "what are we going to do?" There are no answers, only the insistent beat of her own heart. The days that follow are lined with silent tension. Penelope continues working at the school, writing on the board, correcting exercises, ignoring the glances at her stomach. She teaches as if nothing in her life is moments away from changing, but every carriage passing down the street, every male voice in the hall, makes her pulse lurch. She fears that he will come, and she fears that he won't, and that contradiction consumes her more than she wishes to admit. On a cold afternoon in early November, leaving the school with her folder pressed to her chest, she notices unusual movement at the end of the street, a dark, elegant carriage, its crest muted so as not to attract attention. Clearly rented, far too refined to belong to Boston. The door opens, and Joshua steps down. Penelope stops walking. The air vanishes. He looks different, his gaze deeper, his face thinner, his posture steady but tired. His clothes are well kept, but still bear traces of the long journey. Even so, he looks out of place in that simple neighborhood, like a torn page from London dropped there by mistake. His eyes find hers, and stop. For a moment, neither breathes. Joshua takes a step, then another, then hesitates, as if afraid that approaching too quickly might break her. "Miss Penelope," he says at last, his voice rough with use and emotion he struggles to contain. He doesn't finish. His eyes drop to her rounded belly beneath the shawl. A subtle tremor touches his hands. The silence that follows is immense. "You," Joshua tries again, voice cracking. "You are with child. Is the child mine?" Penelope lifts her chin, a small, proud gesture. "Yes." The color drains from his face. He grips the carriage door as if needing support, then shuts his eyes, holding his breath, remembering the single night they shared. When he opens them again, something appears that she has never seen in him. Fear, not of scandal, not of duty, but of losing her. He steps closer, carefully. "Why?" His voice barely forms. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say that night had consequences? Penelope lets out a short, broken laugh, rough, almost splintered. And when, Joshua? When you sent me away without allowing me a single word? Or when your response came signed by your secretary, as if I were merely administrative business to be dispatched? He closes his eyes, as if each sentence strikes cleanly, deservedly. I committed a terrible injustice against you, he says at last, and the formality cannot hide the raw weight of his guilt. And I know nothing I say will erase it, but I came because I need to try to mend what I caused. Mend? Penelope shakes her head, feeling tears threaten. Joshua, I lived months between fear and shame, alone, not knowing whether I would be accepted anywhere. Do you imagine that disappears with words? No, he answers immediately, voice low and earnest. Words are not enough. But I am here. I am here because I finally understood that the mistake was not only believing a lie, it was lacking the courage to know you truly. I want, if you allow me, to try again. Penelope studies him for a long moment. Long enough to see what had been hidden for months: vulnerability, truth, deep, unvarnished remorse, and also something she once feared had been only her imagination: affection. But the wound is still open. I don't know if I can trust you again, she says, each word heavy as lead. Not after what happened. Not when it took so little to cast me aside, and so much for you to come. Joshua lowers his head, but does not step back. I understand, and I do not expect forgiveness now. Only time. You asked for time in your letter. I give you what you ask, all the time you need. Penelope breathes deeply. The baby moves, insistent, present. She closes her eyes for a brief instant, and when she opens them, she says, "Then it shall be so. Time." Joshua nods, slowly, reverently, as if that single word were a grace he never hoped to receive. For a moment they remain there, two fractured worlds, trying to learn how to move toward each other without breaking. And for the first time, Penelope believes that perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible is not entirely lost. Chapter 8. Surrender. Joshua takes rooms at a modest boarding house 2 streets away from Penelope's. He has no wish to corner her, much less to imply he expects any physical closeness. But he wants her to know he is there, that he will not return to London and leave everything as it was. This time, he stays. In the first days, they barely speak. Penelope allows him to walk her to the school in the mornings, but always with a few steps between them, enough that to the neighbors he appears only a respectful acquaintance. Joshua keeps that distance with the same discipline he once reserved for matters of state. He watches her walk with steady determination, despite the growing weight of her belly, and realizes how much she has changed. In the afternoons, when Penelope finishes her lessons, he waits for her at the corner of a busy street, where they will draw less notice. They walk side by side, each wrapped in their own silence. When she goes to the market, Joshua offers to carry the heavier bundle, never the entire basket, for he knows that would be inappropriate. And when she lets him take even part of the weight without a word, he counts that small gesture more valuable than any political agreement he has ever signed, because he is painfully aware that every minute at her side is far more than he deserves. And it is there in the noisy streets of Boston that Joshua begins to truly see Penelope, not the Penelope of London's ballrooms, but the one who lived beneath all that glitter. She teaches poor children with tireless patience, speaks to vendors as an equal, bargains over prices without shame, without fear, without depending on anyone. And when she believes herself alone, she rests her hand on her belly and smiles, a smile so soft it makes his chest tighten. She has become stronger than he ever imagined. And the more he watches her, the more he is forced to accept a painful truth. Penelope does not need him, not to live, not to smile, not to go on. And it is precisely that which makes him want, with almost desperate humility, to be worthy of her, not as a duke, but as a man. One cold afternoon, with the wind carrying the scent of salt and damp wood, they pass a small fabric shop. She is nearly 8 months along now. Penelope stops. Joshua follows her gaze to a bolt of soft white flannel in the window, perfect for baby clothes. She stands there for a moment, motionless, then sighs and seems ready to move on. "Go in," Joshua suggests quietly. "Choose what you need." Penelope turns slowly, surprised. "I don't need your help," she says carefully. "I know." He holds his hat against his chest. "And yet, please allow me to offer this. It is the very least I can do." She studies his face, searching for some hidden agenda. She finds none, and steps inside. The shop is small, the wooden floor creaking under their feet. Penelope chooses the flannel with care, along with thread and tiny mother-of-pearl buttons. At the counter, she hesitates for a moment, clearly calculating whether her purse will stretch to the cost. Joshua moves closer, drawing coins from his pocket. "Let me," he says, gentle yet firm. She does not protest, not this time. And while the woman behind the counter wraps the purchase, Penelope whispers, "Thank you." It is the first kind word since his arrival. Joshua feels as though, for a brief instant, the world has begun to breathe again. Their walk back is quiet, but not strained. Merely calm. A truce. "Do you sew?" he asks, more for the sake of hearing her voice than from curiosity. Penelope lets out a small laugh. "My mother insisted I learn the basics. She said a lady should never rely entirely on maids." "I always suspected your mother was wise," Joshua murmurs. "Now I truly need the skill." She touches the wrapped bundle. "Life is different here. I am different." "Yes," he says, stopping to look at her. "And I must admit, you have changed for the better. You have become even more remarkable." Color rises in her cheeks. She looks away. "Do not try to win me over with pretty words." "They are not pretty words," he answers softly. "They are simply true. You crossed an ocean alone. You built a life with your own hands. You are bringing a child into the world without anyone's support. That is extraordinary." Her eyes gleam. Not with vanity, but with something far more fragile, something that has been starved for too long. "You never saw me that way before," she murmurs. "That was my greatest mistake," Joshua replies without hesitation. "But I see you now, and I have no desire to look away." Penelope draws a shaky breath. "And if you find that I am only myself, then I shall count myself lucky," he says. "Because only yourself has always been more than I ever deserved." They stand still for a heartbeat, so close that he can catch the faint, clean scent of her hair. Penelope looks down at his hand, extended between them with no pressure, no demand, and chooses. She touches him. Light, brief, but enough to crack a wall she once believed unbreakable. The days that follow are transformed. Penelope speaks more. She tells him stories about the children, about Mrs. Dawes's habits, about the streets where she has discovered small, unexpected charms. Joshua listens as if every word were a privilege. He laughs with her, walks with her, learns at last how to be simply present, and when she asks him to stay for supper at the boarding house, he can hardly conceal how deeply it affects him. It is not an elaborate meal, only soup, bread and cheese, but to him it is the first true home where he is received as a person, not as a title. They sit in the small parlour Mrs. Dawes lends them. The oil lamp throws a warm, gentle light over the table. "Do you miss London?" Joshua asks. Penelope thinks before answering. "My family, yes. The rest, no. London always felt like a place designed to please everyone but me. Here, at least, I can breathe." He watches her. Her honesty is a force that moves him more than any grand speech. "And if I asked you to return?" he says, careful. She sets down her spoon, looks at him steadily, though her gaze carries weight. "Return as what, Joshua? As your reinstated fiancée? As the mother of your heir? As a duty?" Joshua does not look away. "As my wife. Not out of obligation, not to mend a scandal, but because I truly want to build a life with you." Penelope's breath catches. "And if I say I wish to stay here?" Joshua feels the blow, but does not retreat. "Then I will stay here as well." He rests his hands on the table, not reaching for her. "I will delegate what I can. Travel to England only when necessary. I will not allow the ocean to separate us again." She stares at him, incredulous. "You would do that? Leave your country, your routines, everything you know?" "What I know has never made me whole," he says, with a new kind of calm. What I have found here gets might. The tears she has been fighting slip free silent. You cannot expect me to hear such things, and remain untouched. I expect nothing, he says softly, only that you feel whatever you must. Anger, fear, hope. I feel all of them as well, and for the first time I am not running. Penelope closes her eyes, and when she opens them, there is a decision there, not an ending, a beginning. If we walk together, she says slowly, I want it to be as your equal. I will accept nothing less. You have always been my equal, Joshua answers. I was simply too blind to see it. She smiles. Small, true. Then, we will try. But slowly, Joshua, slowly. He nods, reaching across the table with his hand open. I have the rest of my life to prove I have changed. Penelope lays her hand over his and lets their fingers interlace. They remain that way for long seconds, a quiet pact. Then she pulls her hand back, not to reject him, but to rest it over her belly. Joshua hesitates, then with almost reverent caution, he places his hand over hers. The baby moves, his breath stutters. Was that your child? Penelope whispers, saying his first hello. Joshua swallows hard, emotion tightening his throat. And there, in that small room lit by a single lamp, Joshua feels for the first time in many years something that does not stand on duty, title, or honor. Joy, pure and unadorned. And the quiet, solid certainty that he is finally walking in the right direction. Chapter 9. A new beginning. The days that follow become something strangely gentle for Penelope, soft and unsettling at once. Joshua remains in Boston. He does not speak of England. He never mentions returning. He simply stays. He rents a small office near the port, where he spends long mornings writing detailed instructions for the stewards of Whitcomb and the estate manager. Letters take weeks to travel back and forth, and for the first time in his life, Joshua learns to live with delay. He discovers that the world does not crumble when he does not answer immediately. The duchy continues to exist, even with an ocean between them, and without the constant weight of duty pressing on his spine, he finds that he can breathe. He and Penelope see each other every day, not out of routine, but out of choice. In the mornings, Joshua walks her to the school, always keeping a few respectful paces behind to avoid neighborhood whispers. Penelope introduces him as a family acquaintance, and that is enough to calm the curious. Sometimes during recess, he watches from a distance as she teaches a little girl how to hold her pencil, or adjusts the coat of a freckle-faced boy. Joshua, who never imagined having patience for children, finds himself making them laugh with stories about horses and castles. And Penelope, seeing him from afar, realizes she likes what she sees, not the Duke, but Joshua, the man. Joshua learns details he never noticed in London, that Penelope wakes before sunrise and loves the silence of the early hours, that she hums soft Irish songs when she thinks no one is listening, that she avoids storms, not out of fear, but because of childhood memories, and that when she is nervous she twists the fingers of her left hand, an intimate habit he wonders how he ever failed to see, and Penelope discovers what he always hid, that Joshua has a quiet, unexpected sense of humor, that his refined hands bear calluses from years of riding, that he carries old burdens no one ever asked him to bear, and that, when she speaks, he truly listens, as if every word matters. One afternoon, while walking through the market, Penelope feels a sudden tightness in her belly. Not pain, a small contraction, just her body reminding her that it works without pause. She stops, resting her hand on her rounded stomach. Joshua notices instantly. Are you in pain? His voice is calm, but his eyes reveal the alarm. No. Penelope breathes deeply. I just walk too much. It happens sometimes. Nothing serious. Even so, let's go back, he says, offering his arm gently. Please. A single word changes everything. A request, not an order. Penelope looks at his arm, steps closer, and slowly rests her hand on his elbow. It is the first time walking together feels natural, not as duke and arranged bride, not as strangers, but as two people who by some quiet miracle have found a shared rhythm. Joshua walks her back to the boarding house and down the corridor to her floor, but he does not enter her room. It would not be proper. Still, he remains there, waiting for her to sit and breathe. "I'm all right, Joshua." Penelope smiles. "It's just the baby reminding us he exists. But I think, in a few weeks, he'll be here." He stays close but respects the distance. There is tension in his face, worry, guilt, something deeper. "I want to be here when that happens," he says at last. "Sometimes I imagine how different everything might have been if I had known you like this. Before all of it, before the lies, before the leaving." Penelope studies him with a gentleness he doesn't expect. "Perhaps nothing would have happened as it should," she says, touching her belly. "Perhaps we needed to lose each other to truly meet." Joshua lifts his eyes, something vulnerable shining there. "You truly believe that?" "I'm learning to believe it," she answers. "Because if I don't, then everything I endured to get here has no meaning." "It had meaning," Joshua says softly but firmly. "It changed you, and it changed me too." He hesitates, then lower. "Would you really stay here, if you had the choice?" Penelope breathes in slowly. "I don't know what I'll do. Not yet. But I need to know whether you mean it. When you say you'd stay." "I do," Joshua says without blinking. "Of course I carry enormous responsibilities with my title. So I can't abandon Whitcomb, and I know I'll need to return from time to time, but I can trust capable men to manage the estate. I can divide my life between 2 continents. I can learn a new way of living, as long as it is beside you." Penelope feels a knot rise in her throat. "You cannot say things like that," she whispers, "and expect me to remain untouched." "I don't want you untouched," Joshua replies. "I want you honest, with me, with yourself." She can no longer keep the distance between them. She takes a step, he takes another. Now they stand close enough for her to see the slight tremor in his hands. "I'm afraid," she confesses. "Afraid to believe, and watch you become again the man who sent me away." "I'm afraid too," Joshua answers. "Afraid I won't be enough. Afraid you'll realize you deserve someone better than me. But I would rather be afraid beside you than live safe and alone at Whitcomb. That place was always a mausoleum, and after you came into my life it became even colder." Penelope closes her eyes, and when she opens them, the last wall, the one she guarded with iron and fear, finally gives way. "Then, we'll try," she says, barely above a breath. Slowly, Joshua inhales like a man pulled back from drowning. May I hold you?" he asks, voice roughened by emotion. Penelope smiles through her tears. "You may." But they do not embrace inside her room. She steps into the corridor, a gesture that says everything about who she is and who he must be. Joshua gathers her into his arms there, in the narrow hallway, holding her with reverent care, as if she were something too precious to be pressed too tightly. Penelope leans into him, feeling the warmth, the scent, the safety she never thought she would feel again. It is there, in that dim, narrow corridor, that the true beginning takes shape. The baby moves, strong. Penelope laughs softly. "Someone has an opinion about this." Joshua pulls back just enough to look at her, his expression a blend of awe and tenderness. "Or someone," he murmurs, "is already announcing their presence." She takes his hand and guides it to her belly. Joshua feels the movement. His face changes, everything in him changes. "My God," he breathes. "It's wonderful." "It always was," she says gently. His eyes shine. "Boy or girl, may they be healthy. And if there is justice in this world, may they have their mother's eyes." Penelope blushes. "And if they have yours, then they'll be stubborn," he smiles. "Stubborn, determined, and endlessly loved." Her laughter fills the corridor, soft, free, and more beautiful than any music he has ever heard. That night, when Joshua returns to his lodging, Boston lies quiet under the glow of the lamps. The street glimmers with their reflection. The sea breathes in the distance. He does not miss London. He does not miss the pressure of the salons, nor the immaculate walls of Whitcomb Manor. For the first time in many years, he is exactly where he wants to be. And he understands, with a clarity beyond words. Some loves are not planned. They are not chosen. They cannot be controlled. They are surrendered to. And Joshua, at last, has surrendered. Epilogue. Boston, April 1836. Penelope woke to the sound of birds. Not the birds of London. These were different, loud, restless, as if they were fighting over the world the moment dawn touched it. She smiled before she even opened her eyes. The cradle beside the bed creaked softly, and she turned her head. Eleanor slept on her stomach, tiny fists curled up by her face. 4 months. 4 months since the little girl had entered the world, small as a rosebud and just as fierce. Now she ruled the house with decisive cries and long, watchful silences. The house, compared to Whitcomb Manor, it was nothing, a small place of pale wood near the school where Penelope taught. Nothing grand, nothing noble, but it was warm. It was theirs. A home built brick by brick, gesture by gesture, the first Penelope could truly call her own. There was a small garden out back that she tended with the care of someone planting memories. Young flowers, still timid, but alive. It would take time. Everything of value did. Penelope made her way downstairs slowly. Motherhood was more exhausting than she had ever imagined, and somehow more beautiful. Eleanor had Joshua's moss-green eyes and the unruly red hair Penelope herself had spent a lifetime trying to tame. When the baby smiled, even for an instant, Penelope felt her heart melt completely. In the kitchen, Joshua was already awake, sleeves rolled up, preparing tea. He turned when he heard her steps and smiled, a real smile, simple and unguarded, with none of the stiffness of London drawing rooms. "Good morning," he said, handing her a cup. "Is our little commander still asleep?" "For now," Penelope replied, returning the smile, tired but content. "I wouldn't place any bets on how long that will last." She has her mother's sense of timing, and her father's stubbornness. "A dangerous balance," he murmured, leaning in to kiss her forehead, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It still surprised Penelope, this ease he now had in showing affection. But she had learned to accept it, to believe it. Day after day, he had proved that he was no longer the man who had sent her away without hearing her voice. He was someone else. Or perhaps the same man, finally allowed to exist. As they sat down, Joshua cleared his throat. "I received a letter from my mother," he said. "She intends to visit us." Penelope's eyebrows lifted. "The Dowager Duchess? Here?" "Yes." He hesitated. "I don't know what to expect, but I believe she wishes, at the very least, to attempt some form of reconciliation." Penelope thought for a long moment. The Dowager Duchess had been the starting point of so many wounds. But blaming only her would be too easy. Joshua no longer hid behind that excuse, and Penelope had no desire to either. "She may come," she said at last, "but remind her this is my house. Here, I follow my own rules." Joshua's smile deepened, pleased. "I've already made that clear." And she agreed. Before Penelope could answer, Eleanor's cry sliced through the quiet. Penelope began to rise, but Joshua was faster. "Stay," he said gently. "Finish your tea. I'll see what she needs." She watched him climb the stairs, his deep voice mingling with the baby's small protests. Something settled quietly inside her chest, not perfect happiness, but something more truthful, serenity. When Joshua returned, Eleanor was awake and fussy, taking in the world with the same intense attention Penelope knew so well. "She was hungry," he said, handing the baby over with careful hands. Penelope settled into the rocking chair and brought her daughter to her breast. Joshua sat beside her silent, as if watching that moment was a privilege too great to disturb with words. She studied him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "How it might have been. If I had understood who you were from the very beginning," he answered, his voice low. "If I had been worthy." Penelope shook her head slowly. "Perhaps we wouldn't be here," she murmured. "Sometimes you have to cross winter before anything can bloom." He took that in like a truth he had long felt, but never dared to say. "Even so," he insisted, "I regret the time we lost." "Then don't lose any more," Penelope replied, smiling softly. "We are here now, all three of us. Joshua took her free hand. His fingers, always so steady, trembled slightly. "I received another letter," he said, "from Whitcomb's steward. The work is finished." "What work?" she asked. "The garden." A small smile touched his lips. "I had roses planted, the same kind you used to tend. They're waiting for you, whenever we decide to go back." "If we decide," Penelope almost says, and then she does. "If we decide," she corrects gently. He inclined his head. "When?" he repeated, not as an order but as hope. "I want Eleanor to know England. I want her to know where she comes from. But I also want her to choose her own path. Nothing will be forced on her, or on you." Emotion rose inside Penelope like a tide. "You've changed," she whispered. "You changed me," Joshua replied. "And I am grateful." When Eleanor finished nursing, Joshua took her, cradling the baby with a confidence Penelope never thought she would see in him. The little girl sighed, satisfied, and fell asleep against her father's shoulder. "She has your eyes," Penelope said. "And your spirit," he answered. "Heaven help me." Later, when Eleanor was settled back in her cradle, they stepped into the small garden behind the house. The soil was still hard in places, the rose bushes far too small to offer shade. But they were there, alive, holding on. Penelope knelt beside one of them, resting her palm on the cool earth. "Do you think they'll survive the next winter?" she asked. "I believe they will," Joshua said, kneeling down beside her. "If you're the one tending them, I doubt they'll have much choice." Penelope laughed, and the sound filled the small space like light. Joshua took her hand. The honesty that had once cost him so much now came almost easily. "Penelope," he said, with a new gentleness in his voice, "you are the strongest person I know, and I am honored to walk beside you." She looked at him. The distant, guarded Duke was gone. Standing before her was Joshua, just Joshua, the man who had chosen to stay. The man who had learned how to love, even though he had no idea how when all this began. "I love you," Penelope said at last. He froze. For a second, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then Joshua smiled, the deepest, most unguarded, most genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. "I love you too," he answered. "I always have. I just had to lose myself to find my way back to you." They kissed there, knees stained with soil, early spring light touching their faces, young rose bushes growing quietly around them. It was not a perfect ending. He had not ceased being a duke. He would still travel many times back to England to deal with matters that demanded his presence, but it was real, and above all, it was theirs. Because the kind of love that survives winter, the love that chooses to bloom where everything once seemed doomed to die, is the love that remains. Like the roses, small, but alive, and always growing.